Hi everyone, welcome back to the course of Introduction to PowerShell. What we're going to be talking about today is variables and data types. So let's get started. So if I prop open my PowerShell command line again, what I want to do is I want to talk about the concept of variables. So sometimes you may have a need where you have to do something more than just run commands. And I'm going to get you to the point of writing a script, but in order for you to write a script, you have to have a little bit of a foundation in terms of developing just a program itself, right? I'm not going to go into the tenets of algorithms and all this stuff about computer science. You can probably get that from my other course in C++, which is flying around on YouTube for free somewhere. What I just want to go over is just the concept of a variable and how it works and how you can use it in your scripting. So PowerShell has different types of variables actually. They have variables that are built in, and then they also have variables that you declared. Okay. Let me go into first as an example of a variable that's built in. So if I do for variables in terms of the syntax that you got to use in PowerShell is you'd start the variable name with a $, and then the name of the variable. So maximum history count. Okay, and I'll explain to you what that variable does. Okay, so this variable is called maximum history count, and it is a built-in PowerShell variable. So it comes with the shell. You can use it in your scripts. It already has a value. It's kind of like built into the environment. Now, this specific variable is what it says. It's how many commands are kept in history. Okay, so by default, the number of commands that are kept in history in PowerShell are 4,096. Now, let's say I want to change the value. So I can change the value in PowerShell. That's not hard. What I have to do is do something called an assignment statement. So in programming, we call this an assignment statement because I'm going to show you what the syntax is. What we're doing is we're setting the value of 200 and assigning it to this variable. So if I do that, I'm going to reassign the value of my PowerShell variable, and you're allowed to do that. Okay, so if I do that and then I run my PowerShell variable again, you'll see that the new value is 200. Okay, so now this variable exists. It already exists in PowerShell. Okay, there's two classes of variables in PowerShell. There are user-defined variables, which are variables that are created by you, the sysadmin. And then there's automatic variables, which is the example that I just showed you right now. So let's take a look at a user-defined variable. So let's say I want to do temp, right? I hope that's on a PowerShell variable. Let's see. Okay, so temp right now has nothing. Maybe let's do per perk. Okay, so that's going to show me that it has nothing. Now, at this point, what I want to do is, if you're getting the same thing or if you're getting an error, I actually want to use a command calling strict mode. What strict mode does is it's going to verify everything in PowerShell that I type in terms of, and starting with variables. So what I want to see is I want to make sure that if I type a variable in the console, it's going to give me a an error. Okay. So what I need to do is I need to call the command called set strict mode. And then I'll do version, do the latest. Okay, and now if I do that, it's going to give me this error information. And that's actually what I want. I want to be strict. I like being strict. I prefer not to be too loosey-goosey. So, and it's up to you. I mean, if you just want to be loosey-goosey, that's okay. I'd just rather be strict because as we start out writing PowerShell scripts, you're going to fall into good habits if you do start this way. Okay, so I do recommend you set your PowerShell script to strict mode. Okay, so that tells us that that variable does not exist, temp, right? So what I could do is if I want it to exist, I would just assign it to something. So let's just assign it to red. Okay, so if I do temp equals red and then I press enter, that has two things. By doing that, causes two things in PowerShell. One, it's going to define the variable called temp in the PowerShell environment. And then the second thing is it's actually going to assign the value of red to my variable temp. So now if I write temp, you'll see that the value is now red, right? So that temp variable will not change unless you explicitly change it. So as many times as I call it, it's still always going to be red. Okay, now there's a PowerShell command that we can use to set variables names and colors. And this is actually the cleaner way to do it instead of doing it the way that on the command line. Okay, so you can use the command called set variable with the parameter called name, and then we'll call this temp, and then the value we'll call it red as well. Okay, so now if I call that and then I do get variable and I'll do temp, it's a more structured way to get the value, right? So name value pair, and we are using a function. We're using the PowerShell functions. So the set variable will set the name of the variable with the value, and then the get variable will get the name of the variable with the value and display it on the console. Okay. You can also, if you want to see what variables are available to you right now, okay, if I pass that in, then I can see what variables I have in the console, which is pretty cool, right? Pretty cool. So if you see here, there it tells me what my edition is, where my home directory is, where my present working directory is, and so on. So these are all the variables that I have available to me. So I can easily say, let's do shell ID, right? So the value of shell ID is Microsoft.PowerShell. And I can also easily say get variable name shell ID, right? And then that gives me a better structured result with my name and value pairs. Okay. So here's another important, I guess, PowerShell gotcha that I want to touch upon as well. So let us say that we have a myvar variable, and I want to set this to nothing. Okay. So in PowerShell, you can set variables to null. So if I do that, and the null is really represents nothing. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm defining a variable called myvar, and I'm setting it to the value called null. Okay, so if I do myvar, you'll see that it doesn't return anything, but if I use the get variable name myvar, sorry, you'll see that the variables exists and the value is null. Okay, now you're thinking, well, why would I want to do that? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and it's easier to recognize in hindsight. You're going to be writing functions, and those functions are going to be returning responses. And sometimes when you're debugging certain PowerShell scripts, you may want to see what the value is being returned back. What you can do is if you call a function and you see that the value is null for that specific function that you're calling, or the output of the function, you'll know that something is wrong in that function. Okay, so that's why it's kind of like a gotcha, where you can have null variables, but they're important because not in terms of just creating them, but in recognizing that when you're writing a function, if certain functions return null, then you'll know that something went wrong in that specific function. Another example of a good function that you could have in your toolbox is the last exit code. Not function, sorry, variable. So let's take a look at last exit code. Let's see, sorry. So at first glance, when you run the last exit code variable, it is going to give you this error here. It says it's undefined or whatever. This variable itself is going to get set if you run any type of executable. So let me give you an example. Okay, and it's available after you run some type of external application. So you remember the old command ping, going back to the old school, right? So when external applications such as a ping executable, when they finish running, they're going to give you a return code or some type of exit code. Typically, a 0 will tell you that it's successful, and a 1 will tell you that it wasn't. Okay, and in this example that I'm going to use for ping, that's the case. So in ping, the 0 indicates success, and the 1 indicates that it did fail. In this case, when I'm going to run ping to just a type of any type of site, right? So if I do that, obviously it's going to fail. So if I do that here, now what happened there at the PowerShell environment is now the last exit code got set. So now if I run this, you'll see that the 1 was set. If I run the ping command again to a proper domain, Okay, so if I do google.com, now my last exit code should be reset to 0, and that's what it is, right? So you saw here two examples, right? One is I pinged a domain that was crappy, right? I was expecting it for not to reach. So the exit code that ping gave me was a 0. I'm sorry, a 1. And the exit code for google.com obviously is going to give me a 0 because 0 is successful. Okay, so this is another variable that you can use if you are calling external applications in your PowerShell script. You can use this variable to see if it was successful or if it was not. The next thing I want to talk about is an automatic variable built in for PowerShell. It's called the preference variables. Okay, so let's run our get variable command, and we'll just do preference, right? Verb, noun. We're going to do the wildcard here, which we learned in the previous lecture. So here are my variable names, okay, which are called the preference variables because they have a prefix of, a suffix of preference. So what these variables do is they control the behavior of your output stream. And what I mean, and I'm going to get technical in terms of terminology, and I'll always remind you what the technical term is. It's just so you know, because as I go through this course. So when you talk about output streams, it's basically what you see on the console. That's a stream. Okay. What these variables do is they allow you to control what you see on the console, on the stream. So for example, okay, let us say that I have the following command, get variable name, blah, 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 something like that. Or we'll call this Poland, right? So that right there is a stream, right? That's an ugly red text. Okay, this is what we refer to as the error output stream. Okay, this is the error output stream. So what I could do now is, if I'm writing a script and I don't want to see this, I want to kind of suppress this. If I run into an error and I don't want to see this when I'm executing my script, I can always, let's go back to these here. I can always shut that off. And I can shut that off by setting the value to silently continue. Okay. As you see right now, the preference variables are already set. So confirm preference, the value is high. Debug preference, the value is silently continue. And error action preferences is continue. So let's play with this. So if I do error action preference is equal to silently continue. Okay, so I'm going to do that. And then if I call this get variable again, instead of seeing that red ugly text, it's going to suppress that error message. So these error variables, again, automatic, built in, and they just allow you to suppress what's on the stream, on the output stream. Okay. I'm going to change this back to continue because it is considered bad practice to suppress stuff. You may want to, but I prefer not to. Okay, and you shouldn't either, just in case something goes haywire in your script. Okay. You can also, if you want to look into this more, is you can see get help and then about preference variables. And we can develop a whole course on this, okay, on preference variables. It's going to give you the how you can do the help on this. Okay, if you want to find out more, or you can go on the documentation online. Okay. I'm going to continue with variables part 2 of this lecture on the next video. But I'll end this lecture over here because on the next lecture we're going to talk about data types.